Türkiye-Rus ilişkilerine yönelik açık bir provokasyondur.
Совершенное преступление – это, безусловно, провокация, направленная на срыв нормализации российско-турецких отношений.
Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. Russia's ambassador to Turkey, Andrei Karlov, has been assassinated in the Turkish capital. The killer, an off-duty police officer, shouted, "Don't forget Aleppo," after the shooting. It happened just a day before Russia and Turkey were set to meet to discuss the war in Syria. The nation's leaders say this is an attack aimed at derailing relations and that they won't bite. Just over a year ago, the two countries broke diplomatic ties after a Russian jet was shot down for violating Turkey's airspace. They have since reconciled, but the friendship has had its ups and downs. Today's newsmaker is the late ambassador, Andrei Karlov, as we ask how his killing will impact an already complicated regional relationship.
Andrei Karlov, Russia's ambassador to Turkey, shot dead in Ankara. The gunman, an off-duty police officer, Mevlut Mert Altintash, shot Karlov 9 times in the back while he was speaking at an art exhibition. The assassin was then heard yelling, "Don't forget about Aleppo, don't forget about Syria," before being shot by Turkish special forces. Karlov had been a diplomat for 40 years. He was posted to the former Soviet Union's embassy in North Korea in 1979 and became Russia's ambassador to Turkey in 2013. The killing happened a week after pro-regime and Russian forces recaptured rebel-held areas in Aleppo, and a day before Turkey and Russia were due to meet in Moscow to discuss the Syrian conflict. Russia and Turkey's leaders have labelled it a provocation designed to damage relations.
Ülkem ve milletim adına
On behalf of my country and my nation, I send and repeat my condolences to Mr. Putin and to all Russian people.
The answer to this can only be the strengthening of the fight against terror, and the bandits will feel the difference.
Russian-Turkish relations have only recently recovered from this. The moment Turkey shot down a Russian fighter jet for violating its airspace. One of the 2 pilots was killed. Putin described the act as a stab in the back and responded with economic and diplomatic sanctions. The rift remained until August, when Erdogan made the first move, sending Putin a letter expressing his condolences for the Russian pilot's death. Ties have now been normalised, and the two countries have been working together to end the war in Syria. With the rapprochement so fresh, both sides seem determined to not allow themselves to be provoked, or for the cooperation on Syria to suffer. A meeting between Russian, Turkish and Iranian foreign ministers in Moscow, scheduled for Tuesday, continued as planned. But the attack has raised security concerns.
It is necessary to tighten security of Turkish diplomatic missions, the embassy and other missions in Russia, and also to get guarantees from the Turkish side that Russian diplomatic missions will also be secured.
Shortly after the assassination, police arrested a man for firing shots outside the US embassy in Ankara. The embassy, as well as US consulates in Istanbul and Adana, have been closed as a precaution. With tensions in the region already high, will this assassination push Russia and Turkey closer together or further apart? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Okay, to discuss this, I'm joined by Emre Erşen, Professor of International Relations at Istanbul's Marmara University. Also with me is political scientist Ahmed al-Burai from Istanbul Aydin University. And from Brussels, Evgenia Vozdeva. She's the Director of Production at the European Strategic Intelligence and Security Agency. Thanks all of you for joining us. Emre Erşen, let me start with you. You knew Ambassador Karlov, what was your immediate reaction to the news yesterday?
Well, I was definitely shocked because Andrei Karlov was a very well-respected and well-liked ambassador, not only in terms of the relationship he had with the Turkish government, but also in terms of the relations he founded with the academics and civil society. So it is really very unfortunate that this has actually happened. We are all in shock.
Evgenia Gvozdeva, is it absolutely clear that Russia is determined, as Yvette said in her report, not to take the bait, not to take the provocation, and to essentially not respond in the way that whoever might have been behind this, whether it was the lone gunman or anybody else behind him, had wanted Russia to react?
Yes, I totally agree with you. And if yesterday, right after learning these awful moments, there were really a feeling of fear that can clearly damage relationship between Russia and Turkey and have an impact on the talks. Today, we can see from the reaction of Russian authorities, Turkish authorities, and from the reaction of Russian public that the main interest is that to continue constructive relationships between Russia and Turkey. And what we can hear today in Russian media from Russian authorities, that the incident should be considered as a provocation, and we should not allow this murder to derail the relationships, constructive relationships between Syria and between Turkey and Russia on Syrian issue.
Ahmed, al-Burai, how's this event, this assassination? Political assassinations are major events. I mean, and you know, it was extraordinary. Many of us watched the video. It was unbelievable knowing what you were going to see unfolding. Do you believe that this event is going to have a major impact?
Of course it will. You know, in 1903, the same incident happened at the time of the Ottoman Empire. This is by the way, this is the first time in the Turkish the Turkish Republic history, in the modern history, that such an assassination happens. But in 1903 happened the same thing, like the general consul, the Russian general consul, was assassinated by an Armenian soldier in the Ottoman Empire. And what happened later on, Turkey made lots of concessions to the Russian country at that time. They already piled their navy in the Black Sea, but I believe this time things are different because already an incident happened and strained the relationship between the two countries, which is the downing of the Russian jet. Now, this is going to have serious consequences, and I believe that the biggest loser in terms of the negotiation, in terms of the conditions on the table of negotiation, whether in the regional issues or in other issues, is going to be Turkey, because Turkey will find itself embarrassed politically and diplomatically to put more concessions, make more concessions to the Russian side.
Let's ask Evgenia. Evgenia, is that how you see it? Turkey, the biggest loser, Russia, the biggest winner, because they're going to say, hey, our ambassador was assassinated. You know, do something for us. We're not going to respond angrily, but do something for us.
Yes, absolutely. I do agree. And that is once again the idea that is more and more often now expressed in Russian media, that definitely what has happened, it will definitely weaken Turkish position in the coming negotiations. And that will definitely reinforce the Russian argumentation for its action in Syria.
Emre, compare the atmosphere for all of us between now and a year ago, when you were sitting in this seat, Emre, and the jet was downed, and Turkey was being bold, and Russia was being bold. Turkey was saying we didn't do anything wrong, and Putin was saying we were stabbed in the back. We were all a little bit worried here. We didn't know what was going to happen next. Compare the atmosphere today, less than 24 hours on, after the killing of a Russian ambassador in the Turkish capital, compared to the downing of the jet.
Well, definitely, this is the second crisis that we see in less than a year. After the fighter jet incident, now we have this major assassination. But I think the atmospheres are quite different. When we take a look at the fighter jet incident, for example, one of the major issues between Turkey and Russia at the time was that Turkey actually did not contact Russia immediately after the incident. Yesterday, we know that President Erdogan immediately called President Putin, and now the two countries are actually working together, and they are actually working to form a joint investigation commission, which is extremely different from the case that we had a year ago. A year ago, Turkey, as you said, believed that it was right. So actually, it carried the issue into the agenda of NATO rather than Russia. Therefore, I think there is some sort of an understanding going on between Turkey and Russia, which is also indicated by the statements of high-level Russian politicians, including President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov. For example, Lavrov very recently said that they are actually grateful to the Turkish government for what they did during this incident. But of course, the situation was completely different a year ago. So I don't think they are actually comparable in that regard, although we are talking about two very major crises in Turkish-Russian relations.
Yeah, you're right. Very different atmospheres, no doubt. Ahmed, the Russians have called it an act of terrorism. And this is interesting. Do you think it was deliberate? Because it's not always, when there's a political assassination, that the word terrorism is associated with it for multiple reasons. What do you make of that?
Of course, it's an act of terrorism. And, you know, if you look at this, we have to wait and see if the investigation are going to come out with some real concrete evidence that this man was orchestrated by other groups, or he's affiliated to one of the terrorist organizations here in Turkey. But if you look deeply and profoundly to the scene, you would see that this man, the perpetrator, was off duty, and he was there. He was behind the ambassador, and then he started shooting, and he knows the message he's going to convey to more than one party. So after that, what happened? He was killed. How did he get into the place where he's off duty? And his colleagues know this. Big questions mark are raised in there. And after that, you know that he may belong. There are some rumors here in the newspapers, in Turkish newspapers, that he was graduated from one of the Golanists' school. So was he employed by these, or was he pushed by them to carry out this, or was it a kind of personal motive, like he want to avenge from the Russian operations in Aleppo recently?
Yeah, because at the moment there's no hard evidence for links to any group, and all we can do is speculate. But what was fascinating, Evgenia, was that in what he said, he almost gave a little bit to everyone. So he had, he had Allahu Akbar, and then he had a quote from the Hadith, which Al-Qaeda tend to use very often. Then he had a political slogan after that in Turkish. I wonder, who do the Russians, particularly Russian media, who do they think did this? Who do they think was behind this, or do they think it was just a lone wolf?
Let's say, so far, Russian media clearly labeled that assassination as an act of terrorism. Then in Russian media, we can see different positions. There are some who clearly say that it was a planned and mastermind killing, and there are some terrorist networks behind. There are other positions saying that it was a lone wolf attack of an extremist, but for Russian media and for Russian politicians, that is clear, that is a terrorist attack. So I cannot say that there is a general line so far in Russian media attributing this attack to any terrorist group. In fact, if you check reactions in Russian sources, reactions from Russian politicians, there is no names of terrorist groups, neither Islamic State nor Al-Qaeda links nor others that are mentioned in this context. But Russian authorities clearly say that is an act of terrorism.
Emre, if nobody was behind him, no group was behind him, let's try and dip into the psychology a little bit. Could it be that he reflected, as heinous as the killing was, he reflected an extreme end of a lot of popular anger in this country, particularly over the past couple of weeks, after people were seeing those images of Aleppo, seeing those images of men, women, and children being killed, men, women, and children, being evacuated, their homes were bombed out. And might he have been just a Turkish citizen who had been pushed to the limit after believing that there was an injustice in Syria and that his government was not involved at the level that he wanted it to be involved in, at the level of, say, perhaps the Russians or the Iranians and so on. Could it be that?
Well, it might be. I mean, the problem is that we're talking about a police officer here. So if he was a different figure, maybe what you said would have a better truth. But it might be the case because we know that Aleppo especially caused great reactions. And we know, for example, a week ago only, thousands took to the streets in order to protest Russia and what it did in Syria. But apart from that, I think we need to be careful about that because those protests were quite peaceful. Right. I mean, I don't think they were aiming to criticize the government and because of what the Turkish government was doing, but rather it was actually criticizing Russia. And when the fighter jet crisis was going on between Turkey and Russia, during those 7 months, actually many different groups in Turkey, including some of the opposition parties, actually wanted to normalize the relations with Russia. So it's not actually a particular hatred against Russia, but especially the situation in Aleppo. Everybody knows that it has to be solved somehow. But again, since this is a police officer, an official doing this act, maybe it might not be the best theory that we can come up with, whether he was not linked with any other organization. It doesn't seem quite plausible to me.
Ahmed, one of the Syrians on our team this morning in the morning meeting, she mentioned that this is probably going to be worse for the Syrians. This man claimed to be trying to help the Syrians. This might just be worse for them. What do you think?
I believe that when we have a kind of convergence in terms of the point of views between the three main powers, Iran, Russia, and Turkey, if we have this kind of meetings like what happened today in Moscow, this is going to help the people there. Because if the people, the main powers, and they can practice more pressure on their proxies on the ground, if they do not meet on one table and negotiate and discuss the issues, things are going to get worse and worse. So, of course, it will have like serious repercussions and ramifications on the Syrian problems. Now, they were talking about a kind of evacuating the rebels and helping opening corridors, humanitarian corridors for the people, evacuating the people. What happened? This kind of accidents came to reshuffle or shuffle the whole cards and mix all things. So for the people, this is going to be a very fatal consequence, especially if he or Russia finds some kind of evidence that he has some relations with the people in Syria that would make it worse and worse for the Syrian people.
I wonder, Emre, if it is, for example, an internal issue, if it is an internal player, like, for example, the Gulenist movement, something that doesn't have a connection to Syria, might that be better than if it was a group connected to Syria in the long run?
Well, I mean, considering that currently the three countries are trying to find a solution to Aleppo, it would definitely be a better theory if he's linked with some organization, maybe the Gulenist organization. And I think in that regard, in that case, it would actually also strengthen Turkey's dialogue with Russia as well, because Turkey actually has been proposing to the international community that the July 15th coup attempt was also related with the Gulenist organization. Therefore, in this case, and also the fighter jet incident, there are also allegations that
one of the
pilots,
one of the soldiers,
the pilots. One of the pilots, according to this story, was actually linked with the Gulen organization. So the goal there was to create a new rift in Turkish-Russian relations. So if that is the case, then I think this will definitely strengthen the regional dialogue that's going on between Turkey and Russia, and will probably be causing new problems in Turkey's relations with the United States, keeping in mind that Gulen is still residing in Washington.
Okay, well, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu stressed the necessity for a political solution to the Syrian conflict. Let's have a little listen.
Only a political solution will resolve the issues in Syria, and that will be a permanent solution. There is no other way but a political resolution. Our efforts for this political resolution will be complementary to the UN process that we also discussed among ourselves. This bloodshed in Syria has to stop. There should be ceasefire prevailing all across the country.
So that was not too long ago. On Tuesday, just after the meeting with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, when the two met, and a lot of people were wondering if this meeting was ever going to take place after what happened on Monday night. It did take place. A lot of positivity coming out of it. Let's speculate some more, Evgenia. If everything we've presupposed up until now is true, that Russia now politically, after not taking the bait, it holds the upper hand, particularly in terms of negotiations on the region. And if all parties are interested in a political solution, that means what? Does that mean that there's a political solution in Syria based on Russia's terms? Does that mean that Assad gets to stay?
I think that so far the main key word is speculations. We're still indeed speculating on the future of the relationships between Turkey, Russia, and Iran on the Middle East and the Syrian conflict. But indeed, we should say that we assume that today Russia seems to have the upper hand in the negotiations, and the position of Turkey as for today is really weakening, as well as the domination of the United States on the situation in Syria. So if the vector would be maintained, we can see that Russia probably indeed would have a stronger and stronger influence for the entire policy making in the region, and the entire policy making regarding the situation in Syria. That is exactly the position that is expressed today by Russian media, and I think there are some basis on that indeed.
So Ahmed, a political solution to Syria, but on Russia and Iran's terms, is that what it's looking like right now?
Of course, both Russia and Iran do need their man in Syria to stay in power, and they don't believe that a regime change would solve the problem. But we shouldn't disregard or neutralize the ripples on the ground. Still, the people are there. The people started their demonstrations because they're fed up of the dictatorship of the tyrant, and they need to get rid of him. So if you come now, after the people lost more than 600,000 people were killed in the streets, and you come now and say, we're going to find a political solution, and that political solution will guarantee Assad stays in power. So why did we die? Why did we go to the street? It's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense for the people. So the political solution should look for other alternatives. And I believe that Turkey is insisting on this, and that's the card that she's going to play with. But the point now that she's losing the leverage to practice more pressure on both sides. That's the big problem now.
Losing the leverage, yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Final question for you, Emre. So for all of those who feared that this is going to be 1914, Gavrilo Princip and Franz Ferdinand, are they right or wrong, Emre?
I think they're wrong. I mean, we are not expecting a Cold War or, I mean, a World War, let alone a Cold War. Because even during the Cold War times, you might remember that they didn't actually fight with each other because of Cuba. So I don't think there is any reason that the superpowers or the global powers will fight a war because of Syria. Actually, they are fighting, but they're doing this through their proxies. That is the problem that we have in Syria. We have so many different proxies. We talked about Russia, Iran, and Turkey, but even if they reach an agreement regarding Syria, that won't be enough because they will need to convince the other actors. And we're not only talking about regional actors or global actors, we're also talking about non-state actors such as Daesh or PYD, YPG. These are all very significant actors on the ground. Therefore, I don't think it's going to turn into a major war between Russia and the United States if that was the expectation. But basically, yes, the Syrian civil war is going on. The opposition is still strong. They still have Idlib, even if Aleppo is gone. So I think we will actually be speaking about Syria in the short term for some time to come, at least.
Okay. Unfortunately, I've got to wrap, but it's been fascinating. It's been thought-provoking. Evgenia Gvozdeva, Ahmed al-Burai and Emre Erşen. Thank you all for joining us. It's been good. Hope to have you on the program again very soon.
Thank you.
History is littered with examples of young, angry men who killed prominent leaders out in the open to send a message. Sometimes what these men do echoes through the ages. Once it led to a cataclysmic world war. Often it does not. Usually these men expect to be remembered as heroes. A lot of the time they are not. Take the example of John Wilkes Booth, the 26-year-old actor who assassinated Abraham Lincoln. After shooting the US president, Booth shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," Latin for "thus always to tyrants," allegedly what Brutus said at Caesar's assassination. And then he added, "I have done it. The South is avenged." Sounds similar to what we heard on Monday, doesn't it? In the days after, while in hiding in the Maryland woods, Booth was given newspapers of the coverage of the act, and he was shocked because he read outpourings of sympathy for Lincoln. He thought he'd be a hero. Even Confederate sympathizers scorned Booth. So far, after assassinating Russian Ambassador Andrei Karlov, 22-year-old Mevlut Mert Altuntaş is not being hailed as a hero in Turkey. People are asking, what has he done? Is he going to bring trouble to our country? Is he going to make it worse for innocents in Syria? Another massive parallel was drawn all through Monday and through Tuesday. Your Twitter feed would have been ablaze with references to 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb who killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That assassination set off a chain reaction that led to World War I. So, is this going to trigger World War III? Was December 19th, 2016 the same as June 28th, 1914? Well, consider this. At the time, the empire was looking for a provocation, waiting for an excuse to teach the Serbs a lesson. Here, Turkey and Russia might only be provoked if one or both sides have been waiting for a provocation, looking for an excuse. Has the reaction of either side given even the slightest hint of that? And it's important to note that Princip, by giving the Austro-Hungarian Empire an excuse to declare war, brought pain and death and destruction to his people in Serbia. The opposite of a smart plan. In the same way, Mevlut Mert Altuntaş, while claiming to avenge Aleppo, protesting Russia, might just have brought Turkey and Russia closer together. What do you think? Let us know. That's all for now. Thanks for watching the Newsmakers. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.